Hello, everyone. Justin here from the Podcast. Welcome to the first in my series called Uncovering Undercover, where we focus on conversation on the album Undercover. This month marks the 40th anniversary of the Undercover album, and I thought it'd be fun to commemorate it by talking about the album with some people who really know their stuff. And today, I'm super lucky to chat with Ian McPherson, who runs the fabulous Time Is On Our Side website. This is a legendary website for Stones fans that is absolutely a must-have in your bookmark list, so make sure you add it. The link is in the description below. Hello, Ian, and thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Justin.
How are
really
you?
Nice to be here.
Oh, well, I'm honored that you're here, and I have to say right off the top, on behalf of all Stones fans, that we thank you so much for Time Is On Our Side, because that is a Stones Bible as far as I'm concerned for fans. So thank you so much for your work with that.
Those are really nice words, Justin, and I'm just glad to be here. It'll be fun to talk about this album.
Now, could you ever guess that you'd be having a full-length conversation about the album Undercover?
I guess not. I guess speaking for myself, yes, but I guess for a lot of Stones fans or people that are maybe not deep fans, but just fans of rock, and they maybe don't have a high of an opinion of this album. So
yeah, and I kind of wanted to make a big fuss over it, although I didn't know I'd be doing this. I had a series on my channel, you may have noticed. It's the Overlooked Albums series. I had been
right.
a few of those, and I started to realize, well, I thought I was done with that series. In fact, I had put out 2 videos, and I said, I think those are the only Goat's Head, Bridges to Babylon, Between the Buttons, I forget which other ones at the moment. I feel strongly about those being, quote, overlooked. And and so I said, oh, okay, I think that series is done. I realized, no, wait a minute. I think we have one more album that should be considered probably the most overlooked album. And that might be controversial to say, but I did the math. I went back and checked this album out. And anyway, it turns out that we're at the 40th anniversary of the album, which is amazing. So I said, you know what? Let's make a big fuss. So that's why we're here talking to you, and let's just chat about, Undercover.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, it's for me, it's a bit of a nostalgic album, because I was like the other day you interviewed Scott Gallupo, and he was talking about Steel Wheels, if I remember correctly, being the album that came out that he first bought when he became a Stones fan. Well, this was mine. I'd been into Tattoo You for maybe a year and a half, but I hadn't bought it when it came out. So this was mine. So there's a lot of nostalgia, probably biasing my view about it.
Well, that's fantastic. That's great to know, because those first albums are very special, and you can find yourself being biased, but I think over time you can catch yourself being objective about certain things, especially as your love for a band grows. You can kind of call things out, go, oh, wait a minute, that could have been better.
Sure.
And I know that happens, for me, that album is Bridges to Babylon, which we'll talk about during that 40th anniversary. So
okay.
We'll see you then, Ian, okay?
Okay.
Well, okay, but let's get started. Before we kind of go and get into the nitty-gritty about the album, how about maybe some early context very briefly to kind of set the stage for where this album is coming from. It's easy to forget, where it falls in the timeline. But just kind of rehash the facts here. Undercover came out in November of 1983. That's 2 years after Tattoo You.
Right.
And the 81-82 tour that supported Tattoo You had wrapped in 82.
Which was a huge tour, which was not only the Stones' biggest grossing tour at that point, but was the biggest grossing tour in rock history.
Is that right?
By a fair margin at that point. So there was, it created a lot of publicity, which continued with the live album, the live movie. So they could coast on that for a while.
Now, in terms of shows, it wasn't is it also their longest? I mean, I know it's like I'm thinking of 1 year shows, tours rather, like 75, 76, and I guess 72, 73. Was 81, 82 just about the same length as all the other ones for the most part?
I would think so, yes. I think it's more that they were playing pretty much a lot of stadiums and arenas, but probably a bigger proportion of stadiums to arenas than previous tours. So they probably played to more people than on previous tours, I would imagine.
Interesting. Yeah, totally. And then we get around June of '82, we get Still Life. Speaking of the tour, I mean, this is a little snapshot, literally a snapshot of the show. And which, I mean, at the time not at the time, I wasn't around when it first came out, but when I first picked up this album, I thought it was a nice little memento of the movie Let's Spend the Night Together and of that era. But by no means did it, scratch an itch to get a full vibe of that show or that tour. So I never really enjoyed Still Life. I'm so glad that in a way it's been corrected by the later releases.
The archival releases, yeah. Yeah, I think the movie was a lot more successful that way, and since it provided or basic almost the whole set list.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when I was young, it played on TV maybe for like maybe a year later or 6 months later after it came out in cinemas. And by the way, when that came out in cinemas, they had huge speakers, so you were kind of deaf when you came out of it as if you'd been to a show. It was my first Stone show. But when it played on TV, I remember it played on FM radio at the same time, so I taped it on a cassette, and that's what I listened to instead of the Still Life album.
Oh, very cool. That's really cool. And that's pretty nifty that they were able to kind of dual broadcast that on TV and on FM.
Yeah. I don't know if that was in the whole of North America or just special markets or whatever.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, speaking of that, and in February of '83 is when they released Let's Spend the Night Together, which I enjoyed tremendously when I finally got my hands on it. I thought it was a nice, snapshot of what those shows must have felt like, very, kind of vibrant and big.
High energy.
Oh my God. And
yeah,
I've always, that this might be a whole different other episode, but I've always been intrigued by Mick Jagger's voice during that period, right? Isn't it like it's almost a different timbre altogether.
Yeah, we'll probably talk about it. There's one track on this album which makes me think of that singing voice. It's kind of a gruff song, singing through a lower register, and it's almost as if he's part of his overall athleticism, and this way of singing is allowing him to, I don't know, save energy. I don't know.
Yeah, well,
but it's got a distinctive sound.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's very provocative. Every time I hear it, I go, "That's not the same guy, is it?" It always throws me. But no, I'd love to hear what song you think that you hear that in this album as we get into it. So with that being said, I guess the Stones had been very much around. The public had been seeing them in the years leading up to Undercover, into '83 in November with all those products, the live album and the movie. So it's not like they were missing in action. They were very much busy and working.
Right.
And then I guess before we get into the track by track stuff, maybe let's touch a little bit on what the feeling was and what the actual mood of the band was as they were getting into recording Undercover. I was looking at Keith's book, and he happened to mention that there were some tensions, kind of apparently getting worse. Is really what we want to, how we want to say it. I mean, it seemed like a lot of people want to say that this is the album that really began to break the Stones. Obviously culminating with Dirty Work, and there's a lot of things there that have been kind of oversimplified in my opinion, and I think it's time to kind of hash out a little bit more of the details and untangle some of these stories, because I think there's a lot to understand that things didn't necessarily come to a head at Dirty Work out of nowhere. Things had been brewing for a while, and Keith mentioned that Undercover was another tug of war, perhaps because of aesthetic stuff, but yeah, I mean, you mentioned once that, a lot of the tug of war between Mick and Keith were starting, much earlier than people might have assumed, possibly even Some Girls, that area.
Right. Well, I think, and Keith often in interviews will say, that the root goes even back to Exile, when he'll mention when they're recording Exile on Main Street in 71 in the south of France. And Mick, you would complain about Mick flying back to Paris because Bianca was pregnant, and the whole thing where he became more jet set and less slow down rock and roll. But definitely, but definitely things probably started heating up more, maybe around the Some Girls emotional rescue period. And I'm not remembering if it's Keith himself that said this, but or where I'm getting this from, but the sense I have is that when Keith came off heroin, he came back kind of like more with renewed energy and ready to get back to being a full 50% partner. And Mick probably was used to having more of the control by then, and it led to more clashes in terms of what type of music are we doing. And the stuff has been documented, like certain fights during the mixing of Emotional Rescue, or like arguments over song like Dance Part 1, whether it should have vocals or not. And and I think there's a kind of narrative or myth that built up that it kind of happened really with Dirty Work or Undercover preceding it. But my sense is that that was just a natural progression into what Keith calls World War III.
Yeah, it's interesting when we frame it that way. It's as if that they had less to argue about in the early days. There were less, splitting hairs of, oh, we should do this kind of style or this kind of style. It seemed like they were on the same page most of the time,
right.
Anyway. So there wasn't much to have things be frayed until, and if some Girls was obviously, things began to have a crossroads. Oh, there's one way of doing it, and now what's this? Disco? What's this?
Right.
Punk? And
exactly.
So it started to creep in, and then that creeping in just took more and more space, and next thing you know, this rift between them seems to be getting worse.
Yeah, and Keith will mention songs like specifically Emotional Rescue and Undercover of the Night as tracks where he characterizes later on, not necessarily when it happened, but later on in interviews as sort of mixed songs or dance-oriented songs that he wasn't really fully on board with, but just went along.
I remember one interview during the 40 Licks era where I forget what magazine maybe Keith was being interviewed for, and maybe they asked him about the track listing, and he said, oh, there's going to be all the usual stuff, all the good stuff, stuff like Emotional Rescue and Undercover. No, none of that shit. That's mixed stuff. That stuff doesn't go. Those weren't good.
Right.
And they were on there.
Yeah, and they were on there.
They were on there.
That's funny.
So how about that? And I think the last thing to kind of paint the picture before we really get into Undercover is what's hovering over them is we're also discovering that they just signed a new deal with CBS.
Right.
Could you elaborate a little bit about that deal and what was the details of that?
Well, with Undercover was the last album in a 4-album deal that started with Some Girls with Atlantic or WEA in North America and EMI in Europe, basically, which Undercover was going to be the last album there. So they had to renew. So they signed with CBS in August of '83 for, I think at that time, a record sum, I think was $28 million, if I remember correctly. And which made the news. And that became a sort of infamous deal because I don't know the exact details, but somewhere in there, Mick had a side deal with CBS, Columbia, where he would do a solo album. And I don't know if this is reality or myth, but that's my impression through what they've said in interviews, or the rest of the group, or Keith anyway, was that they weren't necessarily aware of this when it came out, and kind of discovered later on. So it felt a bit betrayed that way. Now, is that true? I don't know, but that's the story.
Yeah, I was reading a little bit about that, and that it was kind of tough to get that news, and Mick apparently had to tell each of the band members that this was happening. And, you know, you could see why Keith would be upset about something like that, but he didn't take it in the best way, probably. I mean, he talked about holding a grudge. It seemed like the seed was planted for a grudge, and that grew into quite a tree.
Yes. And there'd probably be a lot to say about that if you do a dirty work deep dive one day.
Yes. Well, get ready for that talk too, Ian.
Okay.
Yeah, and so those tensions are now coming to a head. And I read this great quote in the According to the Rolling Stones book, where Ronnie had some recollections about Undercover, and he definitely categorized the album as uneven to him as he looked at the track listing. He said it was a bit of a mishmash of things, and he had an interesting theory as to why maybe Mick and Keith were not on best terms, especially during this period. He believes that because of Mick's recent sobriety, that that may have rubbed Keith the wrong way, who wasn't necessarily as clean as Mick was. So that was a clash. And, but I could see how Keith, if we want to entertain this idea, I mean, you could see how that something like that could affect someone like Keith, who's very sensitive to that, because Keith likes to hang out, likes to, he's very big on the hang. And
right.
If his best mate is not the same guy he remembered, and he's clean now, and he's clear-headed, clear-minded, and he's sort of becoming a different person, well, that's more of a rift being made between the two guys. And I start to wonder if Mick's sobriety has affected him in his songwriting abilities too, because it's around this time where he became much more calculating and much more purposeful in what he was doing or what he was writing. And I'd like to delve into that at some point, but I find that there could be a link there. But anyway, it's interesting.
It's interesting you bring that up, because I didn't remember that quote, Ben. It's intriguing. I don't know to what extent it's true. I would doubt that Mick became completely sober, or whatever that means. How do you define that? Like, no drugs at all, no alcohol, but definitely he probably became more health conscious, and probably with that coincided being less interested in hanging out at all hours, just jamming in the studio without a purpose. And that probably changed things significantly in the way the Stones worked. And that favored probably Mick coming in with his demos, as we hear about a lot today with the new album. Probably starting then, but going back to what you were talking about earlier about, Mick and Keith in this period, before the recording sessions for this album, Mick and Keith did get together to shatter that myth a bit that they weren't getting along at all, since if they were getting along well enough to decide to come together before the rest of the band and spend 2-3 weeks in a little basement studio in France and cut demos together. And I know Mick said something like he brought 5 or 6 songs with him, and Keith had a few things.
Yeah, here is the quote, which people can find on your fabulous website. But yeah, in 83, Mick says, when we started off writing the Undercover album, Keith and I got in a bit early, and we rented an 8-track demo studio here in Paris. And I said, well, have you got some, Keith? and we took turns at playing the drums, which, by the way, I'd love to hear that demo tape. Well, we played guitar and we got to know the material each of us had written in the past few months, So when we actually got the band into the studio, we had sort of a hardcore bunch of songs, which is actually most of the songs on the album. And I'm so glad you mentioned that, Ian, because I think that's important to realize, because I think that's one of the things that people just so, in a very cavalier way, they want to write off Undercover as, very schlocky, and it sounds, very empty and one-dimensional, and perhaps insinuating that there isn't much thought or care into this album, unlike the other ones, the other classic albums. But we can see here that that's not the case at all. This is, I don't have a quote here to show, but I read on your fabulous website another quote by Keith, who shared that this was the first time in 10 years that he and Mick got together for pre-production to work on the demos. That, so that means not since Goat's Head Soup or so that they did work before they got into the studio. So I want to
that's a good point.
I want to underline that and highlight that as much as this is an album that people love to just dismiss, by no means was it an album that the Stones dismissed or thought, very little of. They were coming into it very prepared and very much wanting to be a successful album, just like all their other ones. So I know it's just something to consider, because it's so easy.
That's a really good point, because when you talk about care, like giving the album a lot of care, that's very obvious on Mick's part. First and foremost, for me, the amount of thought that goes in the lyrics on this album, and we'll get into it as we go through the track by track, which is, a lot more thought out, or probably as just as lyrics than something like Tattoo You. So and interesting, I was thinking about this today too, like the fact that they came together to do some demo writing before. They continued doing that they did the same thing on Dirty Work, even though they weren't getting along well. So they did it on Steel Wheels, and they did on Voodoo Lounge. So that's like at least 4 albums in a row from there, where despite all the animosity, they real and legendary, they still work together, and apparently they've always said they like writing songs together, and it kind of creates friendship.
It's fantastic. So glad you mentioned it. I did not know that about Dirty Work, but just the fact that they're doing that, I mean, that speaks volumes to me. And people want to say, okay, so they got together, big deal. I don't think people are realizing the weight of that. I mean, it's just the two of them in a room, basically secluded, because when they do these demo sessions, they're usually off in some far off place, right? It's not like they're just meeting, down the street or anything. No. They're basically forced to be near each other because they're in Jamaica, or they're in Ireland, or they're in wherever they might be, So, that's fascinating.
And it's easy to imagine that problems probably become bigger later on in the recording process, maybe especially in the mixing stage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where the more difficult decisions come up, and they spend less time together.
Yeah, and they can work on the songs behind each other's backs.
Right.
which is what was happening with this album. That was I think it was Chris Kimsey who explained it, and also it was documented very well in Bill German's book, because this was around the time where he started to I think get in that area. But that this began this little period of Keith coming into the studio to work on the songs from noon to 5 or whatever it was, and then Mick Jagger would come in. Wait a minute. Keith is not up. Keith is not up at noon. Opposite. Mick is coming in from noon to 5, and Keith Richards is coming in from midnight to 5 a.m. So can you imagine that poor producers and engineers for that workload?
Yeah.
But yeah, so those are, you're right. That speaks to your point that it might have been romantic and easy in the beginning to write these songs together with 2 guitars and some drums or whatever, in a room. But yeah, once it got to that later period of the sessions, things again began to become a little bit more delicate, for them.
Right.
Well, with that being said, how about let's get into the album, huh?
Sure.
let's go through these songs and just throw out what immediately comes to mind. And the first that kicks it off is people think it's a title track. It's not completely, but it kind of is. Undercover of the Night. What do you think of this one, Ian?
Well, I love this song. I think it's a classic. I know some fans don't like it, others love it. Like a lot of the Stone stuff. I've always thought this is a song a bit like an update on Sympathy for the Devil.
Huh. How so?
Because they've got similar things. I mean, they both are pretty dark in their lyrical content. This one, they both involve politics. Right? This song is maybe delves more into specifics of what's going on in different parts of South America. But you get the sense of the satanic forces at play in the world, and musically, it seemed to have evolved from like an acoustic samba type piece, like we've heard Sympathy evolved. They both have a lot of percussion on them. You've also got the ooh-oohs, right? A different got
Yeah,
a different type
so
of ooh-oohs.
true. Yeah.
So all of those things always make me think of Sympathy.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love that. Yeah.
And I think it's a great track, like just there's Charlie on drums, but they've also added like Sly Dunbar, like Sly and Robbie, who were these famous reggae studio musicians who played with bands as well. So you've got Sly Dunbar doing electronic drums on top of Charlie. And I think it doesn't sound dated at all. There's not too much reverb, but unlike a lot of mid-'80s rock productions or rock pop productions, there's effects and echo, but it doesn't sound, to my ears, it doesn't sound, thin. There's no synths, so it still sounds fresh. You've got, the guitars slashing guitars. You've got really memorable solo by Ronnie. So it's just a wonderful song and track for me.
I'm with you. I think the song is just absolutely irresistible. Like, it just grabs you the moment it hits, I mean, that's what the first thing that I've always noticed about this song is it's just a great dance track. And
right.
It's sort of funny that, because I agree with you, for it being an 80s song, it's not as bad as it could have been.
No.
And we all know those sounds of what we have in our head of how bad it could have been for an 80s song. And I think it's funny that I think Mick understood that okay, so there's this trend going on right now where things have to be big, and these drums will probably, everyone else is doing these bigger sounds, but maybe he understood either Keith wouldn't like that or it may not work completely for us. So
right.
He said, so what do we do? Well, let's get a timpani.
Yes.
Which is a big sound in a very organic way.
Right.
And I've always appreciated that he at least kind of met the market halfway. Like, I'll give you big, but
exactly.
But we'll go it in a more real way with actual instrumentation.
Exactly.
But I'm with you that I think this is what I was talking about, where it's a bit calculating for me, because if you were to listen to this track without the vocals and the lyrics, you would say, hell, where's the party? Bring out the beer. Let's go.
Right.
And it is that. And I think that's what's interesting, is that this I believe happens to work, where on the top of it you have a very grim, let's admit,
right.
This really encapsulates the rest of the album, really, this grim situation, in my view, with this song. And at the top you've got these very startling images, and it's about something very serious and real with these terrible, war crimes and terrible things happening in South America. Which was Mick inspired by a book he read, or was it?
I think so. Yes.
Right. Yeah. And so I appreciate that he's challenging. And like you say, well, that's actually, to your point, Sympathy for the Devil is the same way. If you were to remove the vocals on that,
Right.
it's like, where's the party? Let's dance.
Exactly. Yeah.
Totally right. And Undercover is the same way, where then you've got your body's reacting to the music because it's just such a danceable track, but your brain is just like, wait, what's going on here? And it's an interesting blend of two parts of your body, really. And I think it works, for how much Keith may hate it. I think Charlie
I
sounds
don't get
very
that
nice.
impression that he hated it when it came out. I get that more of a retrospective, because I remember an interview he was saying, "Oh, let me telling interviewer, we had a wilder version of it that I really dig, and there's an extended version too of Undercover, which is really funky. They released a few of these extended mixes, and the part of the song where the guitar fades out and fades back in the middle, in a way that fits kind of the concept in reggae of dub. I've got these instruments dropping out and dropping back in, and Sly and Robbie are on here, these reggae musicians, and Keith loves reggae and loves Sly and Robbie, and talks about the virtues of dub style of production. So I think the reality is more complex there in terms of Keith's appreciation of the song through the years.
I'm glad you mentioned those alternate versions of, or really the early versions of Undercover. I remember reading Ronnie also mentioning that apparently he was instrumental in helping Mick build the song up with Charlie in the early days of them working at it at the studio. And he says that, there are versions of that track that exists that is nothing like the final product. And I told this story before on one of my other channels when I was talking about one of my favorite productions, which was Undercover of the Night. I think it's got a fantastic production. And when I went to see Exhibitionism, they had this great little module there where you could manipulate the tracks. And Undercover was one of the songs that they offered you to remix. And I heard all these acoustic guitars, which again goes to your point that this could easily have been Sympathy Part 2.
Right.
And, had they gone a different direction altogether, which, it made me, I tried to record it on my phone. I couldn't do it, but it just made me happy and sad, because I knew that this was the first and last time I'd be hearing this, because if there was going to be a deluxe edition of Undercover in the year, 2053 or whenever, these things aren't going to survive those bonus discs, you know how Mick is. But it was so special to hear, and I'd love to hear a deluxe edition, to hear all these early takes of, especially this song out of all these songs.
Right. And to your point about, that zombie work with Charlie and Ronnie, I think Keith's input is very minimal on this. And there's a dispute among the fans that I was reading up on recently on forums about whether Keith appears on this at all, or is this slight riff near the end in the mix his, or is that, Keith apparently said he plays on it, but we could say it's probably very minimal.
Yeah, it sounds like it. You shared with me one of the extended alternate mixes that they put out, and I had never heard of that little lick. I said, "Oh, that might be Keith," but I never heard it on the final version. So it's interesting how many versions are floating around, but or which versions Keith may think he's on that he's not aware of. He's not, but interesting to note. But all I know is that whenever I've seen them perform the song very much sounds like the album version, even without Keith's input.
Right.
It's obvious that between Mick and Ronnie and Charlie and Daryl now,
right,
it's like, oh, that's the whole song. That's it. It's not so much like something like, I don't know, Rockin' a Hard Place later in Steel Wheels, where Keith adds a little bit of his licks from their studio cut that he does on stage. On Undercover, I don't really hear Keith adding much on stage.
Barely, unless he, because you and I have talked a bit about this behind the scenes. This track, it seems like it's Mick that's playing the basic riff, and Ronnie's doing all these the leads, the guitar fills, or most of them. So, but unless Keith doubled a bit mixed parts on some point in the mixes, who knows?
Ronnie does sound great on this. Okay, moving on to She Was Hot.
Right.
This one is another interesting one. What do you think of this one, Ian?
Well, for me, it's another classic. So it's another, I'd say another 10 out of 10 for me.
Yeah.
A completely different song, a much more traditional Stones, almost rockabilly, but with a lot of swing.
Yeah.
Great, very simple or simpler song, but just really a lot of excitement builds up. The drums really snap. Charlie's really good in the coda. Keith is bringing back those kind of echoey guitar licks that he was doing on things like She's So Cold and Little TNA, using the delay or whatever name his pedal went by. And I think that's the last we hear of that type of recording from him. Just great lyrics by Mick of Passion on the Road, stuff like Into the Tall Bamboo, Back to the Human Zoo. Nice Chuck Berry-esque solo by Keith. Great loopy bass lines by Bill. Bill seems to go crazy at the end on this. You've also got Chuck Leavell, who and Ian Stewart on keyboards. Chuck Leavell, who's been with the band now, we could say for 40 years, had joined them on tour in '82. So he's on this record a fair bit. And there's a distinctive boogie woogie piano by Stu that you start hearing on the verse after the first chorus. And Chuck's doing this very nice melody on the piano, the electric piano, shadowing the vocals in the later half during the choruses. So it's like a fun song. It's got this, I find that melody always gives it a slight melancholy to it. So that it creates, even though it's a fun song, there's still some emotion in it. It's not just a joke like She's So Cold. As great as that track is, right? Musically, She's So Cold for me is perfection, like I think it is for you, as I've heard you talk about it on another video. But those are my impressions of it. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's I didn't know about this song till they began to play it around 2006 or 7.
Yeah,
6
around there.
Yeah, it's on Shine a Light. And I said, oh, what's this? At the time, I wasn't too close to Undercover to have recognized it immediately. But that was my first exposure to it. And I love it as well. I'm intrigued by Keith's guitar on it because you would imagine that he would be doing that very expected Chuck Berry rhythm playing, but he's doing this kind of
ticket.
Yeah, exactly. And it tickles the ear. I love listening to it. And it's got that phaser. I forget the brand of that it is, but it sounds so wonderful. And but yeah, I mean, it's such a hybrid of this classic Chuck Berry in the verses and the choruses, which is, as that's very much, I mean, when you hear it, it's very much of its time. I think people can hear that.
Yeah.
The synth keyboards in the background, it is minimal. It's probably more than, quote, Stones fans want on a recording, which is, unfair because but most people would want none, which is, like, it is what it is. Okay. They've got new tools around the studio. They're going to use them. So they're not afraid, or Mick isn't afraid to do that. But I will say, though, that every time the chorus comes in, I'm always thrown off by it, almost as if...
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, it's almost as if I love the verses so much, it kind of, the bottom falls out a little bit when the chorus comes on. Because it is spacey and very dreamy, which it is cool, but I'm so addicted to that beat and that verse. Yeah, but overall, I think it's a winner. If this was track 1 of the album, I think it would work just as well too.
Right.
If people really feel that strongly about Undercover that they want to skip it. But
Right.
you shared with me this fantastic extended version that I had never heard before.
Right.
What's the story behind that? Was it released only on the radio? Because it wasn't really a single.
I think there was one version, yeah, with the DJ beginning at the beginning. That was really was taped off the radio. I don't know. It was which is seems to be the extended take. But with maybe additional vocal overdubs that were removed or something. And then maybe, I don't know when this came out, but some years ago, another bootleg version came out that sounded cleaner and without that DJ intro. Yeah, and it's just great hearing the band, just hearing the drums, the guitars, the bass, building that excitement.
Yeah, I maybe I'll link it in the description so people can listen to it. But for me, it extends the song in the vibe of the chorus. She was hot,
Right.
that part. And believe it or not, a jam comes out of it in a way that involves the synth in a way. It kind of, if I remember correctly, it's like a laser and it kind of clashes with all the other parts. And it's a big drama. It actually works. And I'm shocked. I mean, it's a jam you wouldn't expect. And it's a shame they didn't keep it because it would have made the song, it's already interesting, but it would have just, well, I don't know, maybe because it was the second track of the album, they didn't want to overstay its welcome. But you could see why they'd want to cut it down. But it's a hell of a track, especially extended. Well, no, I think we're on the same page there. It's definitely a winner. And I forgot to mention on Undercover, because I don't think this issue appears on the rest of the album, but is it pretty understood that it's Robbie Shakespeare on bass on Undercover, right? Not Bill Wyman?
Yes, that's my understanding of it. That we can definitely hear Bill on the early bootlegged outtakes, but the bass is, and Bill said he's the one that plays it, but I would dispute that with some other Stones fans that it sounds like Robbie Shakespeare. It sounds like Mick brought in Sly and Robbie, or Mick and Keith, whatever, and to do these overdubs on board for the drums and the bass to give it more of a slapping percussive feel.
Yeah, and we know that Bill doesn't play that way. He plays with a pick and very I don't want to say conservatively, but at least compared to what I'm hearing on Undercover, at least in that early first part in the verse, that's very popping.
Right.
Well, speaking of bass, on this next song, "Tie You Up," according to my the book All the Songs, which is a great thing to have around to check up on these facts, it's Ronnie Wood plays bass on "Tie You Up," "The Pain of Love," which I love this song. I think this to me was for the longest time, my go-to song for the album, besides Undercover. I could listen to that anytime and always love it. But for the longest time, "Tie You Up" was always my only other song that I would go to on this album. I think it's for me, it's the Stones being completely the Stones, because it's a very, putting it lightly, a very provocative subject.
Right.
It's a very raunchy, S&M, themes and stuff like that. It's very edgy, and some of the lyrics are
pretty explicit. Yeah.
Yes, very much so. And so, I think people can overlook that and not realize it. It's hard to always hear what Mick is singing about. But for me, the subject matter is provocative and cool, and the sound of it is funky and cool. Keith is doing these cool, funky chords. And it's funny, I was listening to the bootleg sessions of this album, and the original germ of this song was very much in of a blues standard, really, your 1-4-5 kind of thing. But he still was playing that that slide up with those 7 chords was still there in the original form of the track, but the rest of it morphed into what this became, which was not necessarily a straight ahead blues. But I don't know how to describe it, because I mean, it's definitely a dance track, I guess, but to me, it's just a classic Stones song, just like "Miss You" is, or "Emotional." Right. It's just funky as hell. It's just another irresistible one.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. I mean, that is my favorite track on the album. And so for me, the album is off to a good start with those 3 tracks. I don't think the rest of the album is as consistently high as those 3 tracks. Yeah, it's hard. It's a hard song to describe. Am I right? It's funk, but it's rock.
Yeah.
It's a bit dancey, but it's still, just great interplay of bass, drums, organ, guitar. This is the track that I find Mick sings in that kind of lower register that we were talking about earlier, like on the tour.
Yes,
Not screaming, but a lot of strength and command and personality. Go yeah.
You're totally right. That growl.
That growl, right?
Right. That is so true. And that growl is worse, if you want to say worse, but more prominent, I'll say, in Dirty Work. And in sort of, it kind of started to fade out by the time he got to Steel Wheels.
Yeah, he doesn't sing like that anymore. And when you were talking about earlier mixed sobriety and everything, like, I don't know where if sobriety really plays into it, but this, like, there's something wilder here that you get less of, by the time you're into Steel Wheels, which feels a little less wild, a little more adult. You want to call it that?
That's so true. And, I mean, I'm not going to disagree with any of that. That's so true. It becomes he's more careful.
More careful.
And, we have to admit that as much as that sucks, in a way, the Stones would probably not be here.
No.
If it wasn't for Mick taking precautions, which is what he's doing.
Yeah.
He's got to take care of his voice. He's got to take care. He can't, otherwise they would have burnt out. They would not have been a Voodoo Lounge tour or Bridges to Babylon. Who knows what?
Yeah, I agree with you. And there's different. This is another track like she was hot that I noticed. There's just so many vocal layerings on this. So it's which this is where I like Mick the most, is when he's layering these different vocal tracks on songs. Like a lot of the songs on the ballad side of Tattoo You are like that. He's doing these little mini symphonies.
Yeah. And
with his voice, and it's all him doing. It's all him doing that.
In fact, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I find that is a technique or a personality trait in their albums that they've not done in a long time. And perhaps it was a trend of back in the day. Maybe everyone was doing that, but I kind of miss those. I mean, to be honest, that adds that little, maybe some albums more than others, but to me, those layers add this mystery and spookiness to the music, because you're like, well, we know there's only one guy singing, but why are we hearing 4?
Right.
But it just adds this intrigue to the production, and I just know that they haven't done that, since around this time. Really, it's always been the one vocal in the middle, and only that, and we're not counting harmonies. We're talking about them doubling up the lead vocal, but anyway, it's a nice thing.
And just another thing before we continue, like, just if we look at the flow of the album so far, you've got, in terms of themes, you've got 3 songs which are pretty dark, or pretty a lot of, this is the second song in a row, or the second song rather, not in a row, but where violence comes in combined with sex and passion, right? And that's 3 songs in a row that mention sex. So we're into pretty. This is more more classic, or kind of a harking back to the Stones as purveyors of I don't know what you'd call it.
Yeah, well,
darker elements.
It's not an album to put on with your family around.
Exactly.
And I think that's a great point that needs to be, reminded here, is that let's do the math. This is why we're doing this. We're looking under the hood here. People love to just dismiss this album, but do the work. Look at these lyrics. Look what these songs are about. Look what Mick is singing about. These aren't just fluffy, songs that, that are very comfortable and they're just, no big deal. These are just are disturbing songs. You know, you look at the lyrics to tie you up. They're not exactly words that you would whisper to your lover, you know, on a romantic night. Undercover the Night isn't a song you want to talk about around the dinner table, you know. So keep that in mind. You know, those are the things that affected me as I was looking through this album throughout the years, was that I was constantly being reminded of like, holy crap, this album is not light on its feet by any means. And I think that's part of that contradiction constantly that at least is happening from, maybe like we were saying, from this period on, where, you know, you have the track is displaying itself as a fun dance track, but then you look at the lyrics and it's not. And this whole album is that way, where on the surface you think, oh, it's got synths, it's got dance tracks, big deal. You're not listening. You're not listening. Well, you talk about how dark these songs have been up to this point. Well, thank you, Keith, for coming in with something nice and light with "Wanna Hold You." What are your thoughts about that one, Ian?
Yeah, well, pretty much what you just said. It's like he himself called it a bit of an early Lennon-McCartney type of song. So somewhat, you know, a break from all the sex and violence, all the more steamy stuff that we've been drowning in so far. More romantic kind of "I Want to Hug You" type of song. You know, very, very simple. The accent seems to be more on the melody. I think it's nice because it breaks the mood, and it's hard not to like the song at all, because it is a likable song.
Oh yeah.
But for me, it's not one it's likable, but it's not exactly memorable. Like something like Little TNA is, which also is a kind of a simple, kind of dumb song. I think Keith called it that way, but and it kind of goes on for a bit too long. I think also there's a kind of repetition, maybe one verse too many. Still fun to listen to, but a bit, for me, it's one of Keith's overall weaker songs in terms of him singing. Definitely the weakest for me on side one, but and it sounds like something that maybe the potential wasn't fully reached on the track, or needed maybe a bit more work to make it really interesting. So those are my thoughts.
And I'm seeing here that Ronnie Wood plays bass on this one too. And I'm with you. I can't be as generous as you are about it. Because mind you, my first exposure to this song was Keith performing it during the Bridges of Babylon tour in '97. And I thought it was a fantastic rendition on especially the St. Louis show, which I hope they re-release soon. It's basically out of print now, and if they do re-release it, I hope it's mixed great, because that's one of their best fucking great shows of that of the later period, and I hope they don't screw it up. Not that they have screwed any other ones up, but some of the ones have had questionable mixes, like the Voodoo Lounge one. But anyway, I'm sidetracking. But the performance on that concert I thought was fantastic. I thought it was vibrant and it had personality and you know, at the least some charm, a lot of charm. But the studio track is just not cutting it for me. I think it's just...
Is that right?
Yeah, I think it's so shapeless. Keith is sort of lost as a vocal in it, and whatever lyrics that are there, you're just like, oh boy, give me a third draft, give me a fourth draft,
exactly.
Not just your first or second draft, you know, because it like you said, it's just calling for more attention put to it. And like you said, maybe if it was half its length, you know, an easy peasy 2-minute song, I'm like, hell,
3
fine.
minutes at most.
like, hey, it's all for fun. It's breaking up the darkness in this first half, so I'm all for it. But it's just a wasted opportunity, especially when you hear the other songs that they had left behind on this album in the outtakes. I was listening to the session work from this, and I fell in love with so many outtakes, especially one called "Keep It Cool."
Mm-hmm.
Or was it "Play It Cool" or "Keep It Cool"? I forget now.
I think it's Keep It Cool.
"Keep It Cool," and they came back to it maybe through 2 or 3 times. It didn't really blossom into anything more than a jam, but it was so intriguing and so original, and just, oh man, I could listen to that. And already it was a 10-minute track, the outtake, and I could have listened to it all day. And anyway, but that's the story with the Stones, isn't it? All the stuff they leave behind.
Yes.
But I would have much preferred something that they left behind instead of "Wanna Hold You." But but then we wouldn't have gotten the great live version that came in Bridges to Babylon tour. So it's hard to say. But as a studio recording, I think it's lacking, unfortunately. So this is my first minus of the album so far. Well, actually, yeah, here comes my second.
Okay, go ahead. You start.
Yeah, well, I know we were talking about Feel on Baby before, and it's not that I hate it. I just don't like it as much as others on the album. But it's funny because I was listening to it again these last couple of days, and it's starting to grow on me, I will say. And I'm all for groove songs and songs that aren't much on paper, which is what this song is to me at the moment. But all I can say is I can't wait for this song to finally click, because I can see it one day clicking for me. But that's where I am now.
Okay. I'm a fan of reggae, so I like this. I think Cherry O Baby was probably their first official real reggae track. I don't think they get the beat very well, the reggae beat. Well, I think they started getting it with Send It To Me on Emotional Rescue, and I think they do a great job here. Then again, they put an extended version of this also on that went with the remix or the extended take of Undercover of the Night, which is what they call a dub version. But this is almost already a dub in terms of the amount of instruments and sound effects. The lyrics or vocals are a bit secondary to the groove. So to me, it's like it's their slowest reggae song. It's a lot about the atmosphere. And the chorus is monotonous. I think it's supposed to be, but the verses are very melodic. There's emotion in there also.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. Yeah.
It kind of brings back also the kind of steamy passion in terms of the lyrics, of that we wanderlust and love disease taken over and strangled me. Kind of steamy jungle feeling that you have in some of the tracks early in the album. So we have to mention the percussion again. Lots of they had some extra musicians on this. Martin Ditcham, a British percussionist who'd played with Elton John, Mike and the Mechanics, and they brought two players from West Africa. I don't know if I'm pronouncing their names right. Mustafa Sis and Brahms Kondul. And again, we have Sly's electronic drums added to Charlie. I don't know. For me, I love the beat here. It's just a very nice groove, kind of a like hypnotic quality. I love the way Keith's vocal comes in as well. It's not a distinctive song, the way the first 3 are, but for me, it's like maybe the perfect B-side. But it's good for I think it's a great mood piece, and it fits the rest of the album in terms of all of the percussion. There's a lot of guitar figures too, playing this kind of hypnotic vibe. Yeah, for me it flows well with the feel of the album.
And I'm seeing here that it's Robbie Shakespeare on bass for this one.
Right.
Which is interesting. I didn't realize he was on so many tracks. We forgot to mention in Undercover that all these electronic drums are really done, if I may say, tastefully.
Right.
By no means it's Charlie on electric drums, or at worst, electric drums in place of Charlie. Like there is no Charlie. It's like if you think that's what this album is, then you're already wrong. So that's another thing I want to, break there, is people's assumption that this is, completely an 80s thing, and these electronic drums dominate completely. They're really there to embellish, to accent, to complement certain things. And on Undercover, they're there as like riffs.
Exactly, and like another guitar layer. Here you get a few drum layers. You have the acoustic drums that Charlie plays, and you have this additional percussive instrument. Lots of percussion instruments here, but one of them is the Simmons drums.
Yeah, like I say, maybe as I listen to this album more in the next few days and weeks, the song will warm up, because it can only go up for him from here. I like it, actually. It's just that I don't love it as much as other stuff happening on the album. And to your point, it's, in a way, I should technically love it more, because this is such a break of the doom and gloom, no pun intended, of the album so far. It's been so dark and so kind of, oh boy, if you didn't realize it, and this is a kind of sort of morbid almost album so far. And then right now we have a little bit of a reprise here with, Want to Hold You and Feel On Baby. So a little bit of a break from, okay, let's take a break from all that grime and darkness, Mick, and let's just enjoy some easy stuff. So I technically should be more welcoming of it, but I'm sure I'll love it more as we go. But now we're at the end of side one. So that's a hell of a punch, side one, isn't it?
Yes.
And we're off to side two, which is I think a controversial song, Too Much Blood.
Right.
I've always enjoyed this song, especially because I'm a big Talking Heads fan, and I'm getting flavors of Talking Heads in many ways.
That's interesting.
Yeah, the guitars are a little bit in that manner, kind of textured, and it's about a feeling of the guitar, not necessarily, its purpose as a rhythm part necessarily. Right. So we've got Joe Barber, I believe, is doing a lot of what I'm talking about on the right channel. He's doing these kind of scratches kind of things. I believe that's him.
I think it's Jim Barber. Yeah, it's their guitar roadie. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you for correcting me. Jim Barber, correct. And I believe Ronnie on the other side of that also complementing it with guitar phrases that are in that realm, which, is a testament to Ronnie, that Ronnie has always been the band's Swiss Army knife. He can do anything. Many times you'd go, okay, well, we have a country song, we need a country solo. Ronnie will deliver a great pedal steel on Faraway Eyes. Ronnie can deliver, a great rock solo. And in this case, he can tap into that new wave thing, just like that. And it's fascinating to me. I love it. And so the song, I think, is I think Bill Wyman shines on. I think it's one of his shining moments on the track.
Yes,
funky as hell. Charlie sounds great on it. But it's a little bit of an early doom and gloom song, isn't it? Where he's kind of commenting on how bad it is. Doom and gloom is more political, I guess. But I think the song is fun, and again, it's interesting that he's talking about something interesting. It's not just a silly ripoff of Thriller or anything like that or whatever.
Yeah, it's a fun song, with the rap or the talking part where he's improvising, and then to go from that to the chorus with the strong melodic hook. So for me, it's another great track, right? Nice thumping bass and drums. Again, bongos, congas, tons of percussion. Then you have the horns, right? That add another percussive element.
It is quite a grim song, though.
Yes.
Does it take the cake for grim?
Probably. There's several on this album, but probably, although that's what he's a bit complaining about.
Yeah.
In the song.
And
now reveling in it.
Exactly. Yeah. And for people who don't know or, didn't look it up, but it's based on a true story of, was it a Japanese man who somehow lured a female friend or a date, or I don't know if it's someone he knew closely into his home, and eventually murdered her and geez, I feel uncomfortable talking about it.
Yeah.
Anyway,
You can quote the lyrics, put her in the refrigerator piece by piece.
Yeah, right. And so Mick sums up the story in the song, and it's a very, for a song that sounds so not happy-go-lucky, but funky and fun.
Yeah, that's true.
It's very low to the ground and extremely disturbing if you let it be disturbing. So again, more of those contradictions happening in the music.
But I think musically the mood is kind of the opposite of that. When you get into the chorus, I want to dance, want to sing. Mm-hmm. It's very happy, like celebratory.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I'm surprised that the chorus doesn't rub me as much as I would feel like it would rub me, like, because there's another song on this which we'll get to that. There's a bridge that really just makes me go, oh, don't go there. I don't know why you're going there.
Okay.
And this one doesn't offend me as much, but maybe because I don't know why it happens to work. But you're right. That part it adds a little bit of light into this very dark room that we're in, and it does happen to work. And I don't know what about it is very 80s to me. Is it the melody? Is it the way he sings?
Right.
It's so strange.
And maybe we should mention the video clips, right? We haven't so far. They did 3 for this album: Undercover the Night, She Was Hot, and this one. And they're all really fun, well-made videos, right? This was the first album that they did after MTV became a big thing, and they didn't tour for this album. So instead, they made these elaborate video clips that are all really well-made and fun to listen, fun to watch. And
maybe you could, would you mind sharing your experiences with those music videos? Because I have no connection to it, and I don't know how well they were received. And did they in a way save the album or save those particular songs because the music videos were successful? I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't know how much they. I mean, the album did well enough, but it didn't do fantastically. Maybe we'll get into that at the end of when we do our wrap up. But certainly the videos got a lot of attention. Undercover the Night was banned. That got them publicity because it was.
Where was it banned?
I forget where, but I know it was. Was it in the UK? I'm not sure.
Wow.
So it gave them, it kind of, solidified that edge that the song has and the album has, and each video is very distinctive. Huh? You've got the kind of political thriller with Undercover the Night. You've got the sex comedy, which He Was Hot, and here you have the horror movie, kind of like a bit like a thriller, which for Michael Jackson, which came out at around the same time.
Yeah, out of all those music videos, I think I enjoyed Undercover the most.
Yeah.
It's just so strange to see them actually take a music video so seriously.
That's true.
Because it's either I don't even know if they're considered music videos. People tend to label them that way, but all the early promo videos where it's just them performing the song, really.
Right. Lip syncing.
Exactly. Like, I wouldn't consider them music videos, but I can see how people just label it that way. But anyway, so I'm used to either that or like in the later era, like, Anybody Seen My Baby, where it's, it's a modern music video where, they're performing and there's a plot to it. Anyway, in these from Undercover, they, it's almost like like 3 little movies or something.
Movies, yeah, they definitely have plots. And
yeah, I think the Too Much Blood one was a little hard to follow,
right?
And just odd. I don't know. I'm biased because it's hard for me just to physically, like, the aesthetic of the videos are a little hard to get into. You feel a little bit of a distance between them. But yeah, I mean, it's a fun track. I don't think much of the quote rapping. I think the rapping is not really rapping. I mean, if Mick wants to call it rapping, fine. But
no,
it's I think it's hilarious. He's just talking. I think
it's spoken words. Yeah,
I think my favorite one is. Did you see Texas Chainsaw Massacre? Horrible, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, perfect. I love it. Well, how about we move on to Pretty Beat Up? What do you think of Pretty Beat Up, Ian?
To me, this is kind of the filler track on the album. I know some fans like it a lot. It's one of Ronnie's co-written numbers, but it's probably one of his least for me. It's an okay riff. It's fun to listen to, but it's just this repetitive, a bit two-chord jam with not too many changes going on during the song. So it's a good groove, but it kind of repeats. Not too many differences harmonically between the verses and the choruses. So it's a weaker track for me.
Oh yeah, I'm completely with you here. This was another clunker for me, and I love Ronnie. It's a head scratcher why it's even on here. I don't even like why. Like considering what they did with it, and Ronnie is quoted as saying something like, in terms of the song "All the Way Down," which we'll get to, he said of that song that, oh, that was a song we didn't explore enough, and it didn't reach its full potential. I'm like,
Right.
are you sure you don't mean Pretty Beat Up, Ronnie?
Yeah.
Because like that's how I feel about Pretty Beat Up. It's to me, in terms of its production and as a recording, it's a little bit like how I've described "Wanna Hold You." It's a little bit shapeless to me. Nothing comes out. It's just nothing is sharp. It's all dulled, rounded edges, and nothing jumps out for me. But that being said, as a song, I guess I love it because my first exposure of the song actually was Ronnie Wood's live versions during his solo stuff.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the one on Slide On Live or Slide On This Live, I forget the one.
Right.
That was the first time I heard it, and I loved it. I thought, oh, it's a great riff, and it's punchy, and everyone should go check that out. I think Bernard really sings the lead on that one.
Okay.
But that to me is what Pretty Beat Up is, and so I was like, when came across Undercover, I was like, oh, I'd love to hear the original version. I was like, oh, this is nothing. What a lump of crap. It's just disappointing considering, how I love the other version. So you're just like, oh, hey, don't tell. How could this be? It's like two different songs. It looks like it's Keith Richards on bass on this.
Yeah, it's very loose when you listen to the bass playing as usual when he's playing bass. There's still fun things. I mean, I think Mick sings with gusto. He's almost shouting on most of it. It kind of it flows well from Too Much Blood because again there's horns here, so it kind of follows that sound. But yeah, for me it's the least on the album, along with Keith's track.
Yeah, I'm with you. And then things start to really pick up in a interesting way. Talk about a diversion we just went through here with those songs, but we're now at the second half of side 2, and we have the song Too Tough. What are your thoughts about this one?
Yeah, it's a classic sounding Stones riff, very like a throwback to Street Fighting Man or Jumping Jack Flash. Simple, straight ahead rocker. It's not terribly inventive or original. But it's still a good song.
Yeah, I wrote it's Stones 101.
Yeah.
And that riff is again nothing that's going to change the world, but it's definitely got an attitude, and it's an interesting premise. Of I don't think I'll give it that it's original that Mick is talking about. Having to be tough in this relationship, despite whatever, bad things are happening or how destructive she might be or how out of a bad relationship it might be, that the idea of staying tough. That's an interesting, and he hasn't sung about that before in any capacity. So that's new.
Right. And you can tell he put a lot of effort into his lyrics. There's a bit of a narrative going on here. And you wonder like what these comments are about, like the one where he says, I was married yesterday to a teenage bride. You say it's only physical, but I love her deep inside. You wonder, is that a right comment on the Stones dating young models?
Right.
You had, I think it's that year that Bill Wyman started dating the 13-year-old Mandy Smith. And this was, this was probably not known by the band itself, but looking back, it's kind of like creepy.
Yeah. No, that's a great connection. I didn't realize that, but I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. I think Mick is a sponge. He'll take things from anything that's happening,
Right.
that's happening in personal lives and in public lives, you know. That's a great point. I will say that the cherry on top for me on this song is Ronnie's solo.
Right.
On here is fantastic. Mick is quoted as saying that it almost sounds like a heavy metal solo.
Exactly.
It's so wild, and it's got a lot of some distortion and stuff, and a little bit of some feedback things going on, a little bit, but it's just so wild and the craziest I've ever heard him play. It's very exciting. I think it's just the centerpiece of the song for me.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think Ronnie really shines all throughout this whole album, more so than Keith. And he's probably more prominent than Keith on a lot of the tracks.
Yeah, I'm so glad you say that, because that's sort of been my impression on the album, was that it seems like, and I've seen this, especially in recent times, that Ronnie's very diplomatic, and he'll be, he's everyone's best friend, he's right in the middle there. He can be on Mick's side and on Keith's side and all that stuff. And you can tell that Ronnie is very important to Mick. At least he's become that way in recent years, I find, on stage especially. I see that Mick relies on Ronnie a lot, and anyway, my point is, on this album, I could see Ronnie going, okay, well, hell, these are the songs. Someone's got to play guitar on them, and let me help my guy here, and he's all over Undercover the Night. That song sounds fantastic. And you're right. He is really the MVP in a way of this album.
Strong vocals by Mick again, on this one. Also very near a growl on this one too. Very much in the lower register.
Yeah, totally right. That's totally right. I never. That's so funny you mentioned the growl. I now I'm going to always hear it. I love it.
I don't think he's shouting on these songs like he does on some of the Dirty Work tracks. He's not up to shouting yet, but there's definitely a growl.
Is this the song where the lyric of birthdays and suicides?
I think that's the next one.
Well, the next one, perfect. Next one is All the Way Down. This one is. I wrote it as confusing. I think I like the verses. This is the one where I was saying how it's the bridge that comes up, which Mick claims is pretty.
Right.
That's this weird vocal thing that he does. It's falsetto. And I just think it's so ham-fisted in. It's so obviously that it's plugged in, and it's not very organic to me. So the whole song it's a head scratcher for me.
Okay. Is that's the part where he sings "She's There When I Close My Eyes"?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, but it does have that cool. This one I think also has a little bit of a narrative. How the years they rush on by, right. Birthdays, kids, and suicides. That's a hell of a rhyme.
Right, exactly.
But here we go again. Back we go to the dark and sinister stuff.
Yeah, I think these are some of Mick's best lyrics. It's really it sounds like an autobiographical song where it has that appearance. It's almost confessional, nostalgic, going over the past. I was being Mr. Cool, just a snotty little fool like kids are now. I dreamed of reaching greater heights. I raved about it every night and talked.
You're right. You are right. And I think that's what's confusing for me, was that I think I was connecting with this. I think it was just weird more this contradiction. It's a very, I won't say emotional, but it's about real stuff, and you can't help but want to connect it to Mick. But yet it's a very tough sounding song.
Yeah.
Which makes you want to rock out, but
Right. It's like a mid-tempo rocker, but lyrically and emotionally, it takes the place of a ballad on the album. And that's kind of the weird thing.
Yeah.
This weird disconnect. I mean, I really like the song. I mean, I think melodically it works, even though I agree with what you said, about the awkwardness maybe of the bridge coming in. And, Ron Wood has that quote about they didn't explore the full potential of this song. So that's probably another song that would have benefited by more drafts. maybe not so much as lyrical drafts, but musical arrangement.
Yeah.
But I still love the sound of it. Just listening to lots of fairly simple drum fills by Charlie, but full of energy. Just a pleasure to listen to. That little bit where it goes, I guess is this not a bridge, but another section where it goes down, down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like bells, and they'll have a guitar chiming, for that kind of like that effect. They're just little neat production touches like that I enjoy.
I have to agree with you that it sounds, it's very alluring, because I will say that what does grab me each time is Mick's delivery of these lyrics. I don't think he's ever sung exactly this way before. This particular rhythm he's got, I was 21, naive, not cynical, I try to please.
Right.
This kind of very, I don't know, Dylan Chuck Berry, where it's very rhythmic.
Right.
It's not something you would expect to sing. It's completely purposeful, and I appreciated that. And I think you're right that the narrative is personal, and I think I was caught by what seems to me like some kind of vulnerability. I forget which part of this is the bridge, perhaps, but it says, "You give me back that time right now. I can see it if I close my eyes. Was every minute just a waste? Was every hour a foolish chase? I don't believe it." That's a small little moment where Mick is, not being Mr. Tough Guy. It's a nice little change of pace, considering the album is very, bravado and Mr. Macho.
And to the point we were making earlier about the Stones putting a lot of care in this album. Obviously, Mick did.
Yeah. Yes.
A lot of care in those lyrics. A lot of care in all the vocals. So he's really there's like an intense engagement with the material from his part.
Yes, totally. Yeah, I mean, you got that right. From the production and the aesthetic of the songs to what he's singing about, you can tell that a lot of care went into it. And this song is just, for me, it's just going to get better and better each time I listen to it, I think. I mean, it's not too far off for me in terms of loving it, but it's still early days for me, I think, with this one. And we come to the final song of the album, It Must Be Hell, which a few people have mentioned reminds them of the new song Angry. I don't know if you saw those conversations around online.
No, I didn't know.
Yeah, people thought that the riff was close to It Must Be Hell, which I don't think it is, but it's almost like, isn't it more like Soul Survivor or something, that riff?
Yeah, to me it's the exact same riff as Soul Survivor, or the Soul Survivor riff towards the end of Soul Survivor.
Yeah, the ba-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da, the classic suspended fourth thing.
Exactly.
I mean, it's an interesting song to end on, I will say. I think it's slightly awkward for me, because the lyrics they're not completely easy to grasp. I like that the first part, and I think the whole song is about this dichotomy between, at least one part he's singing about is the, rich politicians and leaders, who are, affluent, and they've got a pretty good life, and Nick is singing, well, it must be hell living in your, with your life, which I thought that, again, these are songs where you take the vocals away, you think, oh, this is a one-dimensional rock song, but these songs are saying something, so I have to give the song points, that these are well thought out songs. So I think it's a lovely track, and I think it rocks, and it's got a great riff sound. It's strange that it doesn't rise up to the level of an Undercover of the Night to me, or The Pain of Love, but it's still something that I always want to listen to all the way to the end.
Okay, yeah. I have mixed feelings about this song. I think it's cool that they go back to politics like they do at the beginning of the album with Undercover Tonight. And which wasn't something we were getting on, say, Tattoo You, or
right.
And so less personal, more subject matter, a bit more. I don't know if you'd say universal, but and the song does like a bit like Too Tough, but even more so this one. This is kind of like it has a bit of a anthemic, late 60s, early 70s Stones flavor.
Right.
The way the drums come in, you hear that riff, and then the drums go.
Right.
It really sounds like it's almost like it's announcing itself as a straight fighting man for the 80s.
Right.
I think it's only half successful though, because I think it does feel like a recycled riff, so it sounds a little less fresh.
Yeah.
And when we get to the verses, Keith is just playing those suspended notes from the open chord.
Mm-hmm.
It's like when he does on stage the intro for Honky Tonk Women.
Right.
And it just feels a slight bit unimaginative,
Yeah. Yeah.
But then the chorus comes in. It's really, it explodes with energy. So, and great swinging bass line by Bill against Charlie's backbeat. I'm kind of being a bit hypercritical, but it's still a great track. But for me, it's more like an 8 out of 10. It's not. I would wish for something more memorable.
Totally.
As a closing track.
Yeah, and especially when you put it that way, it is the closing track. You're totally right. It kind of ends on a whimper, and I will say if everyone dismissed or hated Undercover as an album because of the bad taste It Must Be Hell may have left, I can understand it.
Right.
It's like, okay, if you're gonna judge an album by one track, that would be unfair to judge this particular one, because that is a bit of a that needed a little bit more time in the oven.
Right.
And because right when the song starts, it's very derivative. I mean, that opening riff is like, okay, I've heard that elsewhere, so okay, let me give it a chance. So you keep listening, and the verses are kind of just, oh no, that can't be the best you got for that. It's just
yeah, I completely agree with you. You're being a bit harsh, but I still agree.
But it's almost like, well, you've got some amazing, interesting things. Well, whatever. I mean, everything's got to be balanced. I'm just saying that I guess it's a little bit too loose and lumpy, and you're just like, oh man, you expect it to be a little tightened up. But hey, on the flip side, there are a lot of songs on this album that are super tight and super calculated and super meticulous in how they were put together. So heck, whatever. Maybe it's okay to let it loose a little bit with this song and just have it be, pretty pedestrian in a way. But it's not an offensive song by any means. I don't think it's a the worst of their catalog. But I guess go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's a lot of the tracks are pretty experimental in this album. You got the reggae track, the dance track, but they kind of end the album with three more slightly straight ahead rockers, which kind of undoes a bit the experimentation that was going on for most of it.
Right. So, totally.
I wish I was a bit more ambitious towards the end.
Yeah, I mean, I'm realizing now that I'm perhaps feeling as strongly as I do because the highs are very high for me on this album.
Yeah.
I think to your point of how the experimentation, the risks, and on the edge that they were going, I think really worked for me. And so when they don't match that, especially with the last song, it's a head scratcher. It's almost like, oh, really? Okay, well, if you say so.
It's probably more experimental in the lyrics, right?
Yes.
And like going back to politics, but the musically it doesn't match. It's too much of a rethread and of stuff we've heard earlier.
Yeah, I could have almost wished if it was just a dumb rock song, like made it about It Must Be Hell, breaking up with this person, just make it dumb, whatever, but because it kind of doesn't go that direction, tries to be a little more smart than it needs to be, I kind of think it fails in that way. But, again, I could see that song being something that I could grow to love next as I listen to it more and more. But as of right now, it's a little bit of a lukewarm thing for me. Well, that comes to the end of the us going through each of the tracks, and I was that was a lot of fun, by the way, and
Yes.
so great to kind of get in the weeds with all that, especially with someone who knows their stuff. And it's interesting to note that, like you were mentioning before, that the album apparently did not perform as well as they had hoped. Apparently, this album broke the streak of 8 number one albums in a row that the Stones have had to this time. So Undercover.
Yeah, which is insane when you when you think of it. How many bands have had 8 albums in a row, studio albums we're talking about?
Yep.
Going to number one.
Absolutely right. And this one reached number 3 in the UK, and in the US it reached number 4. I mean, that's not anything terrible either, but still,
No.
It was a sign of things to come in a way.
Yeah, and it wasn't backed by a tour. It didn't have, Emotional Rescue didn't have a tour either, but it had a stronger commercial single. And this was the year of Michael Jackson's Thriller, so they were not going to get number one anyway.
Right. Yeah, and I think we would both agree that the album doesn't necessarily deserve a number one.
Right.
It just didn't
On a commercial level. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, when you do the math, you can see that there are some minuses on the track.
Also. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because, maybe it was just PR and marketing, but I was looking through the quotes on your website from the band, and at the time, Mick and Keith were very supportive and very positive about the album. And so it's interesting that there's a mix of comments from them where early on they were saying very positive things about it, but then the infamous line from Mick where he said about the album that it's not a very special record,
Right.
Which is what I think everyone latched onto and go, hey, if Mick says it, then it must be true. Forget about Undercover, everybody, But it's not the case. I think it's worth looking into.
Yeah, to me, it's still, I've heard some fans say they think it's the last great Stones album.
Yes.
And that it's the last time they sounded dangerous, that they haven't equaled it, or that's hard to. I wouldn't comment myself on something like that because it's hard. The eras are so different. It's hard to compare. Like, I think Bridges to Babylon is a great latter-day album. How do you compare something like that to something with, that's from another era? I think. I don't think it's the equal of Tattoo You or Some Girls, but it's definitely. I probably like this album more than anything between Goat's Head Soup and Black and Blue, even though I like all those albums. Because the highs, kind of like what you said, the highs are so high. I like the fact that there's, it's a distinctive album. There's, was it Mick or Keith that said it's a really drummy album? There's percussion all over the place. So it has a distinctive sound that from the other albums. There's no ballads at all. So it's like, and dark themes, lots of experimentation, a lot of great guitar work with different sounds to them, lots of tracks with lots of atmosphere. So for me, it's always something I enjoy listening to, or I don't get bored with it, even though there's a few semi-clunkers on it.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm totally with you. And to contrast that, I'd love to read, if I may, Robert Christgau's review of the album, which apparently has gone down in the record books as one of his most memorable quotes about it. But he says, "What do people hear in this murky, overblown, incoherent piece of shit? True, they still slip naturally into the kind of vernacular specificity other bands strive for. Despite the wind tunnel mix, Keith still sounds like the incorrigible genius by accident he is. Nothing stops Charlie, and Mick's Texas Chainsaw monologue is a scream. Also, 2 of the songs have political themes, which I guess is supposed to fill me with gratitude. But I'm such a churl, I'm only grateful for good songs. And these are as tired and witless and nasty as the rest. Their worst studio album, C+. Fantastic writing, isn't it?
Yeah. I don't agree with it, but it's entertaining to read.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because if you look at Chris Gow's history with the Stones, he first of all,
Right.
he labels himself as a Stones loyalist. So he is what we would, in modern terms, a fanboy for the Stones. So
Yeah.
he has given them a lot of passes and is very generous when it comes to the Stones. And albums that most people would ignore, like a Black and Blue, for example, he loves. And
Mm-hmm.
he gave, I think, a bigger bang, an A plus, if not an A minus, definitely an A.
Is that right? Okay. I didn't remember that.
Yeah. And so it's fascinating to see that out of all the albums that, most people dislike, but he loves, and most people in this case are okay about. And a C plus
Mm-hmm.
is pretty much matches, I think, most people's view on it. But anyway, yeah, some strong words there, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't agree with that rating at all. But I would, I think he's maybe witless, tired. It Must Be Hell maybe sounds a bit tired.
Yeah.
Pretty Beat Up sounds tired. But the rest don't.
No, I think it deserves more than a C plus. Here's a cover of this extended dance remix of Undercover,
Right.
which everyone should go check out. I'll put up some links in the description because it's a great way to experience a song in an alternate, different way. I mean, that is if you're interested, because I know some people, this song is very offensive to them. And I'll also put up links to the music videos, which there are 3 of them. And look at that. If that doesn't say, check me out for Too Much Blood, I don't know what will. That's a very alluring picture. But in closing, how about let's wrap it up, Ian? This album, I think, is always maligned, and I think it's unfairly so. I think it's, although very grim and dark and on the edge, I think it's still very hard punching, and it's just jam-packed of rock songs and big in-your-face songs. And like you mentioned before, no ballads, which is very interesting for a Stones album. It doesn't have those
Right.
peaks and valleys. And in a way, if you look at it in combination with Tattoo You, they're in a way, typical Mick, reacting to
Right.
the previous project. Tattoo You, the whole side 2 was ballads,
Mm-hmm.
and so he's like, okay, well, not again. If you think we're going to do that, we're not, which, is so aggravating sometimes with Mick. It's like, no, we like what you were doing. Do a little bit more of that until we say stop.
Exactly.
But no, he'll pull the plug before any of us get a chance to have an opinion about it. But so Tattoo You, end of Tattoo You is spacey and got beautiful ballads, and now they've got this hard-hitting album that does not let go the minute it starts. I personally think it's very funky and rockish and dancey. To me, it still feels like the Rolling Stones. It may not sound like them in a lot of places, but it feels like them, because right there at the bottom, you've got
Mm-hmm.
Bill Wyman, you've got Charlie Watts laying it down and playing their asses off, and they sound great. I think they're at the center of the album, no matter what you might say about the
Right.
additions and the weird stuff floating around the mix. Just listen to Bill Wyman, and in many cases, Robbie Shakespeare and Charlie Watts, and you're home. So as much as Keith has problems with this album because of the synths, which you will find out is very minimal, you're going to find a Rolling Stones album, just like any other of their good albums and great albums. Like I said, the highs are highs if you let them be highs. I think this album has aged better over the years.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree.
I think people are more sympathetic to these sounds, this 80s sound, these aesthetics, these production values, and the decisions in these songs, I think, are much more acceptable today, because a lot of these sounds are coming back today and are familiar now, and people have some warm feelings towards the 80s. So I think this idea that this album is going down as one of their worst from the 80s, because everyone sucked in the 80s, pump the brakes, I say to that, and give this song a chance. Get high, have a drink, relax, and just have fun with the album, even though it's not a fun album, really. But to your hips and your body, it's fun. But,
It's exactly.
yeah. So
I was listening to it again and today, and just what hit me, even in the few songs that are more so, you still have, there's still a lot of fun just to listen to the interplay between the drums, the bass, the guitars, and there's great stuff to be had like that on every track on this album.
I didn't prepare you to prepare a grade, but I'm thinking to myself now, considering Chris Gow gave it a C+, I think I'd give it a strong B+. I'd give it a B+, I think.
Yeah, depending how, yeah, B+, A-, even if I want to be, if, you know, following my heart, I'd kind of give it A-. If I'm using just my head, maybe a B+.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Ian, this was fantastic, and I'm so happy we got to do this because I couldn't think of a better person to share this with than you, and I hope that this is one of many talks that we will have. Before we go, why don't you tell everyone where to find your wonderful website?
Well, it's timeisonurside.com. It's been there for a long time, and hopefully it's going to continue to be there for a long time.
Well, we'll help it be that way. Trust me. That's absolutely true. Thank you, Ian. We'll see you soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
See you.